I'm honestly quite surprised that I haven't gotten around to reviewing Uncharted yet. I've reviewed tons of the most famous PlayStation exclusives from the past decade, and though I've played nearly all of them, the Uncharted games are probably the biggest omission from my catalog of reviewed games. This franchise is a big deal, to the point that it's the only PlayStation Studios game in recent memory to get a live-action movie adaptation, which is a pretty incredible feat, even if the movie is supposed to be not the best. I plan to cover all the main console entries, being 1 through 4 in the Lost Legacy, meaning that we'll begin with the first game in the Uncharted franchise, Drake's Fortune, which was released almost exactly 15 years ago. Uncharted 1 is a relatively simple game in terms of plot and story, following a treasure hunter named Nathan Drake who wishes to find the hidden riches of his supposed ancestor Francis Drake, while being assisted by a reporter named Elena Fisher. Things quickly spiral out of control as you're dragged into a race to the treasure with 3 sketchy guys who are so forgettable that I had to look up their names even just a few hours after beating the game. Basically, you, Elena, and your old friend Victor Sullivan are working together to find this treasure while fighting off the goons of Roman, Navarro, and Eddie Raja. It's a very simple story that doesn't really go to any interesting places with the characters, themes, or anything of the sort. In fact, it doesn't even attempt to. This is literally only trying to be a little action movie style story, but I'd say it succeeds at doing that. You find out some secrets about the treasure you're after, mainly that it actually causes a dangerous curse that causes monsters to be created out of humans, which is a really cool idea and is executed well. And even though you could claim it might have something to do with mankind's greed or something, trust me, this story is super basic, but that's not necessarily a bad thing. Coming off the heels of Naughty Dog's ambitious Jak 3, which had a big, expansive, and awesome story, I think it's alright for Uncharted 1 to instead focus on being a fun, unrealistic, charming action experience. The characters are definitely interesting and funny enough to carry the story, which allows it to succeed at what it's trying to be. Something that is ambitious about this game, however, is the presentation. The game looks incredible for 2007, being either the best or second best looking game of that year, maybe only beaten out by Ratchet & Clank Tools of Destruction. You have a wide variety of beautiful set pieces, and when you see the water reflecting the gorgeous sunset while atop an old, wrecked boat, you'll question how this was possible 15 years ago. The character models are also pretty impressive, with really good facial animations for the time, and the performances are truly a unique thing about this game, especially during a time when video game acting was never that great. Naughty Dog was always head of the class in incredible visuals, animations, models, and especially acting. They treated their games like cinematic experiences ever since 2003, and that culminates in Uncharted, where they let loose and showed their abilities with the new, next-gen technology of the time. The music is pretty generic, but it works and has some memorable bits, which is indicative of how I feel about the game as a whole. Some of it blends together and feels generic and forgettable, but there are many moments that do stick out as awesome and exciting, and it's almost never boring when you're actually playing it. But what exactly do you do while playing it, you may ask? Well, you shoot a lot, climb a lot, and do a lot of puzzles. Those 3 things are pretty much all you do in this game and the rest of the series, and the later entries would expand those further to make them more interesting. That basic summary is really all there is for the first game in the series. The gunplay is satisfying and fun enough, being incredibly responsive and fair for the time, leagues ahead of most of the other third-person shooters that were out at the time, which felt clunky in comparison, even though it's super generic and starts getting really repetitive around 2/3 in. In the final act, it really hits its stride, and the signature Uncharted spice that would further boost the gameplay in Uncharted 2 especially is introduced. Once the monsters are introduced, the gameplay gets way more tense and interesting. You have to keep switching weapons in order to stay alive, rolling away from the laser targeting enemies, running and gunning to keep the approaching monsters away from you, and knocking out any grunts that come into your path. That's when this game is at its best, and the many different combat encounters in varying locations will help you appreciate those heights even more. But unfortunately, this game is very inconsistent. When you're doing basic stuff at the start, it's alright. In the middle, it's repetitive and boring, and at the end, it's great. But there's a lot of other stuff, too. And how is that? The puzzles are pretty great in this game. There aren't too many of them, and none of them are too confusing or dumb. They're all pretty simple, but still somewhat clever, and many of them will have a twist that makes you rethink everything. Pretty basic, but just like the gunplay, they get quite cool by the end. The climbing is a series staple, and I don't really hate it as much as others do, especially since they often combine things such as swinging with vines, leaping across chasms, and climbing holds that crumble after a few seconds to keep things interesting. But at parts such as Chapter 15, it becomes infuriating due to a few clunky issues that exist with the mechanics of the climbing. And then there are also vehicles, like the car, which is actually awesome, and the jet ski, which makes me want to toss my controller out of a window. Truthfully, this game isn't bad. In fact, most of it is very inventive and fun. But there are also specific moments that are absolute garbage, such as the jet ski segments. Who thought it would be a good idea to slow everything down to a crawl just after the first confrontation with the villain gets you pumped up, to have you ride this thing and stop every 5 seconds to shoot explosives? And why is there this current that makes you bump into a wall literally the whole time? Wait. Oh no. I think they got the guy who made Jak 2 to work on this segment. Let's just check the credits here. And enhance? I knew it! And don't even get me started on the finale, which is such a lame confrontation. I do appreciate how you have to think differently by not going directly after the boss, and have to hide behind cover in a more guerrilla way to get the upper hand, but it's a terrible idea to put those methods in the final boss. If that was the boss in the middle of the game, then alright, but for the final confrontation that we've been waiting for so long to have, this is the best they could do? Really? The series would continue to have terrible, forgettable villains with one exception, but we'll get into that at another time. So yeah, Uncharted 1 is a pretty important, classic game that is definitely worth playing for the fun puzzles, gunplay, action set pieces, characters, and beautiful visuals that change a lot over the course of the game. But don't be surprised if you're met with a bunch of infuriating deaths due to janky issues, awful vehicle segments, a lame as hell ending, and a really drawn out second act. 3 out of 5.